Um, so yes, officially welcome to our 2032 conversation this Saturday on the future of food. We are really grateful for our panelists that I'll be introducing soon. But before we officially start, if you've been with us in the 2032 conversations, we like to start with a land acknowledgement. And we're really grateful that Brit Pham, who is a storyteller, facilitator, and producer, who is part of the production team at Resilience, who is helping us with our systems and workflow. She is going to be leading our land acknowledgement today and leading us through grounding breath.
Hi, thank you, Noor. I'm so grateful to be here and really grateful to have been invited to lead us in some acknowledgements and grounding. So again, my name's Brit Pham. My pronouns are she, her, and I want to invite you to, if you can, put your feet firmly on the ground and just roll your shoulders up and back to sit a little straighter than before. And allow your hands to rest in your lap as you enter a listening and a resting state. So before we get grounded with ourselves and each other, I want to invite us to get grounded in our surroundings. First, I want to acknowledge that I'm joining you from Brooklyn, New York, the ancestral homeland of the Lenape people. And I give respect and gratitude to the traditional stewards of this land, and I invite you to reflect on the land upon which you stand. I also want to acknowledge that currently across America, people are protesting in response to the murder of George Floyd, a Black man at the hands of the police. And I want to acknowledge the systemic oppression that Black Americans have faced in this country since its founding. At Resilience, we look into the future to imagine what can be created, and to do so, we must first acknowledge our past and our present. It's our responsibility to acknowledge how the current systems are failing Black and Brown people in this country and to work towards reconciliation. So as I close these acknowledgements and transition us into a grounding breath, I really want to invite you all to reflect on where you stand in this conversation around dismantling broken systems and rebuilding new ones. So thank you for holding this space with us. And now I invite you to get grounded. So go ahead and place your hands on your body. I recommend one hand on your heart, one hand on your belly, and allow your eyes to soften or close. And start taking deep breaths as you tune into your body's natural rhythm. Feel your heart beat. Feel your belly rise and fall as you focus bringing your breath into the deepest parts of yourself. And on your next exhale, just push out all the air possible as we prepare to take 4 big breaths together. First one in through your nose. Follow your breath down your throat, through your chest and into your belly. And out through your mouth. In and out. In and out. Last one, maybe the biggest breath yet. In and out. And return again to your natural rhythm. And I invite you to give gratitude to your heart for beating, to your body for breathing. And as we return to this space that we share together and ground in our conversation on the future of food, we give gratitude to the Indigenous peoples who are the traditional stewards of the land upon which we stand, the land from which our food comes from. Take a couple more deep breaths, and whenever you're ready, start to return by wiggling your fingers and toes. Maybe give your body a gentle shake. And again, whenever you're ready, just settle with your eyes open and arrive. Beautiful. Thank you, thank you, thank you for allowing me to do this. And I'm going to pass it back to Noor and Christy.
Thank you so much, Britt. You are such a gift, and we are so grateful for everything that you have already done for resilience and that you continue to do, and for this beautiful grounding moment that is really important as we start and begin this conversation about the future of food. And as Britt mentioned, at Resilience, we take systemic oppression very seriously, and it is within our mission to expose and to reveal and to work towards reconciliation. As many of you may know, our 2032 conversations are research for the Resilience 2032 social media theater experience, which is a format of experiential entertainment that we are pioneering, where a story unfolds across multiple social media platforms in real time and is driven by our user-created content. So we invite, as many of you and have been opening up, our writer's room to for participants to share their voice and help shape the story and co-create this imagined 2032 future, which takes place in the year 2032, 2 years after the UN Sustainable Development Goals were meant to be due, and on the brink of a US presidential election, where we are facing the consequences of climate change, an increasingly data-driven ecosystem, and a widening gap of systemic inequality. These conversations are kind of a portal for us to understand what action is needed for us to be taking over the next 12 years and what inaction is going to be shaping our 2032 future. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Christy, who's going to give us a little debrief on why we believe in the power of futurist thinking and why we are building a movement of futurists and visionaries by combining futurist thinking and storytelling.
Yeah. So I want to start by explaining what we're talking about when we say futurist thinking. This here is a visual reference that's called the cone of future possibilities. So at the point at the end, that's where we are now. We are in one finite reality, the reality that we're currently in. But as we look to the future, we have an increasing breadth of possibility. So the widest circle is the full breadth of what's possible. And in the center, you have what's probable. So we're not trying to predict exactly what the future holds. We're trying to, with these conversations and with our story, explore the breadth of possibility within the future so we can expand our minds and break out of the mental ruts of our past and our present to see the full possibility that the future holds. So the Resilient Story World will build out just one possible future. So some research from the Institute for the Future says that 53% of Americans say they rarely or never think about the far future. And studies show that people who don't think about the future vote less often, save less for retirement, make poor health decisions, and care less about long-term challenges like climate change. So this means to us that not thinking about the future is a direct threat to our existence in this world. We need everyone working towards these long-term global issues. And we believe that futures thinking can help people do that. Dr. Srini Pillai, who's a Harvard psychiatrist, said, once the brain believes that something is possible, it will chart a path towards your goals that is radically different from the course it would chart without hope. Neurobiologically speaking, the part of our brain that we use to think about our future selves is the same part of our brain that we use to empathize with a different person. So more or less, when we talk about what our future self will be dealing with in regards to climate or in regards to data, or in regards to whatever these things are, we are essentially empathizing with a stranger. So we are trying to leverage future storytelling about our future and our future selves, to build empathy for our future selves and motivate ourselves to take actions that will benefit us in the long term, as opposed to immediate comfort, satisfaction, and those kinds of things. So as we build empathy for each other and for our future selves, that is what we are trying to do with this story world.
Yes. And the Sustainable Development Goals that I referenced, this conversation touches on a few. Zero hunger. Today, more than Sustainable Development Goal number 2, zero hunger. Today, more than 820 million people go to bed hungry, and of whom around the world, 135 million suffer from acute hunger, largely due to conflicts, man-made conflicts, climate change, and economic downturns. The COVID-19 pandemic could now double that number, putting an additional 130 million people at risk of suffering acute hunger by the end of 2020, according to the World Food Programme. And of course, climate action, good health and well-being, and responsible consumption and production are all goals that are interconnected and very much tied to the conversation we are going to be having today. And with that, I'm really excited to be introducing our panelists for today. Ali Wist and Rosa Firdaus Makan. I believe Ali is with us. She has her radio show, perfect, and she that just ended, so we're really grateful that she made time to be here. So Ali Wist is currently a consultant on food futures. She's also a photo editor at Bon Appetit and a part-time faculty member at the New School at NYU. She is the co-founder of Mutamor, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, and she, which is a futurist radio show on the Montaz Press Radio. Her work has been exhibited widely. She is also, she is an artist, and her work as an artist encompasses photography and print work, as well as experiential installations, which render futuristic speculation accessible through narrative and sensory consumption. She refers to her work as climate LARPing. LARPing stands for live action role play, and they concern the future of consumption and food culture as it applies particularly to climate change. And her work has recently focused on environmental grief and the role of taste and aesthetics. Thank you so much for being with us, Ali. And today we are also joined by Rosa Firdaus Makan, who's a social entrepreneur working at the intersection of food and technology. She is also an artist and a poet, as well as a lawyer. And she's working to normalize farm to table for everyone, everywhere, leveraging technology to transform the food system. Her first tech tool is a mobile app called Bites that is now nationwide in the US. Eat with Your Tribe. It embodies the DNA of her own life experiences, her own values, and her vision. Her work has been noted in Food Tank and recognized by Apple and the Arizona State University School of Sustainability. Rosa is also an Ashoka U Fellow, which is how we were introduced to each other, and we're really honored to have you both. To kick off the conversation, I would love to hear from both of you about the rapid changes that have happened in the midst of this pandemic, especially within the food system, and in light of both of your work. What is something that you see clearly now that you could not see 3 months ago? Rosa, maybe you can start with you. I can see you.
What is it that I see now that I couldn't see clearly 3 months ago? You know, I guess my answer to that is that I have been working, or this has been a part of my journey, my mission, is to change the food system fundamentally. And I've been talking about, for actually the last year, how we need to give visibility and support to local growers and have more people be growers of food from different cultures, representing their own different cultural backgrounds, their cuisines, their stories. And so for me, in fact, it wasn't that I didn't, so it's not that I saw this pandemic coming, obviously, but my vision hasn't deviated, it hasn't changed, in that I was believing that more of us do need to become growers of food and to essentially create this sharing green economy with neighbors and different people who right now don't maybe have signage outside, right? That like, hey, I'm growing food, you can come and buy from me. That we need to give visibility and support, and I have some ideas of how to do that, but to the urban farms, micro farms, co-ops, backyard gardens, community gardens, organic and family owned, like small and tiny growers, predominantly in urban areas where the bulk of populations live, over 70% of populations live in urban areas in the United States. So it makes a heck of a lot of sense to grow food where we live, so that kind of changes the whole fundamental how we've been doing things. It completely disrupts the model, right? We've been growing food in monocrops in different places and then schlepping it in with the transportation, with the distribution, with the storage, with things being picked unripe. And so it's been a very poor model. It's been a poor system. And it's really had a lot of negative consequences on our health, on the lack of nutrition in the food, on the chemicals, on a lot of things. And so essentially for me, this pandemic only, if it does anything for me, it shines light on how critical exactly what I was hoping and thinking should be happening. I think this is going to accelerate it. So if there's an upside to this, I think it's going to cause more people to start growing food, to create resilient communities, to create more sustainable communities so that they can feed their own people, their own communities, and sort of have more biodiversity of things growing, because different people from different cultures eat different things, they have different ingredients. And so if you can get more of that, you get more biodiversity. And I can just keep going on, but that's where I'll stop.
Yes. Hi, Ali.
Hi, thank you for having me. I feel like I have to echo what Rosa says. This pandemic really, we're seeing the mesh behind the US food system and the global food system. It's sort of like a tote bag we just dumped out and turned inside out, and we're seeing how inflexible this mesh is. It's like when you're walking down the street in a city and you notice like a pipe or something that implies this larger infrastructure that you never see. And sort of all of that was unearthed. And most of the problem right now has been about distribution. And actually the word apocalypse, its original meaning was just an unveiling.
Yes.
What was that?
Revelation. We've mentioned this on our 2032 conversations before, which is why the people that have attended are laughing, because thank you for saying that again. We love that fun fact.
Right, and it's so poignant right now because our food system was broken, and we have spent so many decades distancing ourselves from our source of food, and creating this massive system. Big systems fail big. And again, I said, what I see right now is big failures in terms of distribution. And I don't know how familiar everyone is with food systems, and how much you've seen of, fields of zucchini rotting, tons of green beans are just being churned back into dirt because there's nowhere for them to go. The issue in slaughterhouses, just millions of gallons of milk being poured out. And this is because these systems are really rigid, and all of the food that was going to restaurants and institutions has nowhere to go. And who is going to pay to put all that on a refrigerated truck and get it to even a place like just a food pantry? And so I think there are a lot of people who are trying to stitch back together these ties we severed between ourselves and food, between ourselves and growing, between ourselves and soil. Of course, the challenge to that is we're now all like very paranoid and overly sanitized, and scared of anything that feels dirty or contaminated. But I actually think, like Rose is saying, there's more movement and a desire to reconnect with the source of our food now that we understand the real threats to it. You know, I think there was, you know, I could go into the whole like history of why we prioritized convenience in an industrialized food system, but we had finally started to come back around to some of that labor from an older food system, pickling our own vegetables, growing our own food. For a lot of folks, it still existed in a leisure realm, not a labor realm. And now that people see like, oh, my cabinet's getting kind of empty and I don't want to go to the grocery store, or like shelves are empty. There's a creeping realization of what self-sufficiency really means and what some of those maybe DIY projects, like what the real purpose and power of them is. And also that we can kind of be our own essential workers, not to feed ourselves entirely, but essential workers on farms and in restaurants and in grocery stores are really at risk, and many of them can still be deported. And what power do we have to grow some of our own food and to make some of our own products and connect with farmers directly, and not have to just like order something on an app and have it, you know, delivered anonymously. So I guess I sort of echo a similar sentiment that it's not really about anything new in a lot of ways.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you for raising that. I mean, one thing as well that I learned in the midst of the pandemic, in terms of how food is sourced, at least in New York, a lot of the workers that are working on these farms, and there are more than 30,000 farms, are either are immigrant workers, and many of whom are undocumented and continue to labor without protective equipment and are living in crowded trailers. And they, of course, are deemed essential workers. And so this kind of topic came up in our conversation about the future of immigration, as well as, around, you know, how we put value on the future of education, actually, and how we value and what is exposing in this pandemic. I'd love to hear from you, Ali, as an artist, and in looking at the future of food as a futurist in the space. What do you think is, what are you hoping will be part of our future everyday lives in the year 2032, in the next 12 years?
It's a good question. I mean, I also want to include an important asterisk on my optimism, that like, oh, we're gonna grow some of our own food and pickle our own stuff. Like, this is still for people who have the privilege and the time to do that. And not everyone, like some other artists and I have been trying to like buy in bulk from farms, and sort of like cut out middlemen. But like, you have to have, I think, the time and the means to do this. And I think this pandemic has also revealed a lot about systemic inequality, which I think I might get into in your question about fears. So I can table that for a minute, but it's really important, the systemic racial inequality that is in our food system, not just in terms of everything going on, you know, in the world right now. But I think what I want to see in our everyday lives is, I hope that we see plants and the food we eat as sort of more of non-human companions and collaborators, even if they are for our consumption, instead of this rigid control over food systems and over farming. I hope that there are new norms about reciprocity and ecological awareness. And part of that is knowing where your food comes from and knowing your farmer. But it's not an agrarian nostalgia of going back. Like, we're not going back. It's not about returning, it's about paying attention deeply and closely to where your food is coming from, when you can, and when you're able to make those connections. And some of that, you know, we need policy and we need the government to like have climate impact labeling on our products so that it's more available for us to know, to have that ecological awareness. We'd love to see climate impact labeling. But yeah, I think that I also hope to see more plant-based diets. I've heard from lots of folks in the restaurant industry that plant-based people participating in plant-based diets is up a ton because of this pandemic. And so I hope that trend continues.
Yes. Rosa, what are your thoughts?
Can you repeat the question to me? I heard it and I was so like enthralled in what Ali was saying that I deviated from your question.
What is something that you hope will be part of our future everyday life in the year 2032?
So I am an annoyingly optimistic, hopeful person. I choose to stay in the light of possibilities of what human beings, through their shared humanity, through celebrating that shared humanity, can actually do. And I believe that we can do quite a bit. And there's a big difference between, we can do things incrementally and they can be our short-term goals, right? Short-term objectives. But that's very different than really having a vision. Even the UN has goals, but it doesn't really have a vision. And I believe that we, all of us collectively, need to be part of shaping a vision, right? For what do we actually want? Because I believe that actually anything is possible at that 2032 mark, literally, from this, the worst case scenario to the best case scenario. I do believe that it's all completely, we're sort of co-creating this as we're going with each other, right? We're just kind of like generating these new thoughts, new possibilities, new energetic like cycles of thinking and then acting on those thoughts and triggering like a ripple effect, like dominoes. What I mean is that, and sometimes I may not make sense to you because I come at everything from a more spiritual perspective, like this is like my life's mission, like this is my work. And in terms of what I'm hopeful about in terms of the future is that more of us are growers, and not just that, but that places where people live, which tends to be urban areas, are going to get transformed into more of green spaces that provide more than just the grass, just the grass that you see, right? Or something to that effect. In other words, they become these healing, nourishing, nurturing, interactive spaces and places, right? The placemaking, our cities, right? There's a lot of things that cities can do to use their vacant spaces, their vacant lots, turn those into community gardens and allow people to either, pay to split that up and rent that little lots if they live like in an apartment or something, right? To grow food, essentially. I think that something else that I'm hopeful about is that all of the people who are currently growers, when we can give visibility to them, incentivize them to grow more food for us locally, sustainably, what we're going to do is inspire other people, other neighbors, other folks to start growing too, in ways that are not just about feeding ourselves, but they're about celebrating our cultural differences, which are beautiful and unique. If there's someone from Cambodia and she grows things in her garden that are, the kinds of ingredients they might eat, that they cook with, right? From those cultural cuisines, that's going to help create a sense of storytelling about that culture when she sells maybe some of her food produce to another neighbor who might be from, somewhere in Indonesia. Like just different people growing different things, sharing their stories, their cultures. It's about what I see, what I envision is that we will flip it on its head, the irritation and the anger and the distractions and the noise and the pollution, the negativity that we've associated somehow with diversity, like it's a bad thing, or that difference is bad, you know, otherness, that's a bad thing. And flip it on its head and see it as really a value add, how valuable it truly, which it is, right? Because in the diversity of voices, of foods that are grown, of cultural cuisines, of different ways to share experiences through the foods we're growing, through the stories we're telling, and sharing of our own cultures in that way really creates resilient communities, right? That's the whole like concept of biodiversity in what you grow, right? You create healthier environments when you have biodiversity. You do not create healthy environments when you grow monocrops of one thing only, right? And so it's like the same thing with cultures, same thing with communities. If we can look at it from a different angle and see that, wow, the more diversity we have. I'm sorry?
Sorry, someone unmute. I just muted them. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I thought someone was asking me something. So for me, it's about how diverse can we get and celebrate that and maximize that actually. And that allow that to be a tool that changes, a lens that shifts us seeing everything as a negative or as a fighting point to being sort of challenged to see how beautiful everything that we've sort of like, I don't know how to explain it. It's like, how can we leverage and get the most out of the diversity that we already have? Because we have quite a bit of diversity, and you know, we don't want to, homogenizing anything, including the food system, is not a good thing. Homogenizing the way people think is not a good thing. You don't get creativity. Nothing comes out of that, right? So we want to disrupt the thinking we have. We've already got the tools. We've already got the people. We actually have all the resources we need. We don't really need new resources. We need a different lens to see those same things, right? We need to see what we've got with a different perspective. And I think that can shift things fundamentally in the food system. And it can have like, it's like a ripple effect, or almost like a spider web or a wheel, where the more you have interconnected and the more you can create positive connections between the different strands of that spider web and see how you can leverage each to give benefit to the other, then you create fundamentally resilient communities, which is what you're talking about, resilience, right? 2032. I think we need to step away from our outdated thinking of trying to solve for different issues, just like myopically, just looking at that one issue itself. Mm-hmm. We need to approach things from a systems thinking approach, essentially. Everything is interconnected. So we have to create as many positive, happy, joyful, good connections between all the different parts to kind of strengthen that spider web as a whole, to make it more resilient.
Yes, I want to go back to something that Ali referenced in terms of our fears, and looking at the systems that are in place that are probably holding us back from making the kind of the future that you are outlining for us, Rosa. Ali, can we unpack this systemic injustice you very briefly mentioned in your answer?
I mean, it doesn't really warrant any brief reference. And yeah, I mean, I think with COVID, we've seen some of this. I mean, African Americans suffer from higher rates of obesity, which is a comorbidity of COVID-19. And people have suggested that's one of the reasons that Black folks have had so many hospitalizations, tragically. But this is fundamentally because we have a sort of racist food system, like most institutions in the country. And there are systemic food system inequalities that put them at risk for obesity and high blood pressure. And this is everything from access to healthy food and food deserts. You know, that term, there's also something called a food swamp, where there is food, but it's actually all nutritionally depleted. And my fear is just that like this good food movement isn't available for everyone, and that the wealth inequality gaps you see in this country will continue to be replicated through food. Like Gwyneth Paltrow can like buy organic kale, but like, can anyone else? And, as long as we're prioritizing corporate profits and lobbyist interests above all else, who have an interest in, like what Rose was talking about, monocrops, subsidized corn and everything, you don't get a free and fair food system, and you don't get health prioritized for every community. And so I've just been thinking a lot about that, because I get really hopeful about alternative ingredients and things that could be on the horizon, and some of these individual steps we can take. I was trying to institute a bartering system with people in New York City in quarantine of, if you can grow this and I can grow my own pickles, and or maybe I'll turn my second bedroom into a raised bed of growing something. But you still also wonder, like, how does this engage with the rest of the community meaningfully? And how much is it just for myself? And I think those are questions we kind of have to ask of our food system.
Mm.
If I can add to that, actually, Alia, that was great. I think that one of the core problems that has led to a lot of the challenges that we see with the food system and our health and all that is because we have looked at food strictly as something about consumption. And we have forgotten that our connection to the earth, to the planet, to the soil, right? That itself, on itself, without even eating the stuff that you're growing, like I, grow stuff in my yard. Just the interaction itself with the soil and nurturing something and watching it daily and watering it and sort of tending to it and caring about it, it's also healing the person that's doing it. It's also giving a sense of groundedness, of gratitude for life itself, because we're seeing how difficult it is that like things take time to grow, right? So we don't want to be wasteful of things. So it puts a lot of things in perspective when you start to grow food, more so than when you grow beautiful flowers, and that's beautiful. But like, there's something about growing food that's gonna like enter your body. This thing that you're growing is actually gonna make its way inside at some point, right? That it's somehow this symbiotic, like this relationship that you're established, or you're reconnecting to our rootedness with the earth, that we belong to the earth doesn't really belong to us. So we're kind of, in small ways, making baby steps back to our own sense of humanity and to our own sense of vulnerability, right? And how much we need the planet, how much we need things to go right for us, and to be in this like good harmonious relationship with that, right? We're the ones that threw nature off balance. Nature didn't go off balance on its own. We did it, right? So we're the ones who need to repair it back again, both selfishly for ourselves and also for the planet, for the healing of the planet, for the ecosystem itself, and for our future survival. But I wanted to say one thing is that the one point that I might have a different view on is with regard to how much time we have or don't have, to do this kind of thing. A lot of people will say that there's just not enough time in a day or whatever, and yet the average person in America, wastes, I believe, 2 to 4 hours a day on TV and social media. Right? So it's not about, I don't believe it's about that we don't have really time. It might be that we just have different priorities. And I think that if you reprioritize what's truly important to you, I think that a lot more of us, I'm not saying every single human being, like every single last person, but the vast majority of people, if they were to reprioritize or just to look at their priorities, right? What's really a priority? And maybe do some shifting of that. Maybe it's time for some house cleaning. I really feel like this COVID-19 in a good way caused some like disrupt, like some shakeups to some people's notions and some just like, you know, zombie mindsets, people just going with the flow and not really doing something about their lives. It's almost like too many people have become victims of circumstances, victims of their own lives, and feel very passively like victims, like they don't know what to do or that what they can do, right? And so it's about how can we get people to a certain extent shift some of their priorities, maybe from the things that are more nonsensical, like the social media, like just brainless, you know, reality TV, whatever all that is, right? And shift some of that energy, that time, that commitment, that energy to something that might reap a lot more rewards for them, both in terms of like the nutrition they're getting, but also with regard to their own inner healing and mindfulness and connectedness to, like, as a human being, to the planet.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of, I mean, like what you're hinting at, I feel I agree with about like a cultural shift. Like we
Yes.
need to have a cultural shift in terms of what we value, and that those, like I would like to see growing food as a cultural value, not just a hobby or an interest. And so then the time becomes more
Yes.
embedded. But I do still think time and priorities will always have a dimension of socioeconomic status that we can't escape. And I also totally agree that like farming and engaging with growing, even if you just grow one thing or you take a rotten sweet potato and like grow it into a beautiful vine, like that is a paradigm shift. It's about bodily cognition and like learning some kind of intangible truth about dirt and soil and food, and being a human on earth that you can't get without that engagement. So I'm totally.
Yeah, and I think that, I agree, Ali, and I think that there's not like a silver bullet. We're saying like if you take this and then everything will be like 100% like completely squeaky clean, pure, perfect. It's more about that, like what we're talking about is the transition. I think everything is a transition, it's a shift, right? And when tides move, it's like a shift, and it has ripple effects, and it has like and transitions are not birthing something new or a new paradigm. It's like giving birth to a child. It's not a simple, you know, sit back and enjoy this. Like it's not a painless experience, right? There's some pain that comes with any transition, with any change, with any shift, with anything that even good ones, like people getting married, they still get stressed. They buy a house, you know, it's a good thing. They still get stressed. So it's not like transition is ever this super smooth, elegant gliding. It's more about we need to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. We need to be okay being uncomfortable for a while. COVID-19 made us uncomfortable. We're very uncomfortable, right? We've gotten to that point of understanding that. And I think that going back to what Ali said is that, you know, when we're growing things and we're interacting with the soil, we're seeing that even as growers, as individual people feeding ourselves, taking care of ourselves, being self-sufficient to some extent, we see that even as growers, it's not just, okay, I got some dirt, I got some soil, I'm gonna plant these, you know, seeds in there and they're just gonna be like perfect and grow, right? It's also the nutritional content, the fertility in the soil, right? Regenerative soil, like what is it in that soil that's going to be so healthy and so nurturing and such a good ecosystem? Like a mother who is pregnant, right? She has to be healthy. She can't have an unhealthy body and be taking drugs and alcohol and whatever, right? And be super stressed out and expect to have like this miraculously healthy child coming out. It's the same with the nutrition in the soil, right? Is that we want to make sure that that soil, when we're planting things, that's actually nutrient rich. And what I mean by that, I'm not trying to veer off and talk about how we grow things. It's actually circling back, and it's like a mirror to ourselves. It's like, okay, see this soil, if it's lacking nutrients, it's not going to give you anything good, right? Same with us. If we're dumping garbage into ourselves or just consuming negative things, whether it's on, online or however we're doing that, we're also sort of contaminating and polluting ourselves, both mentally, emotionally, physically, right? We're becoming, a lot of us have become like these dumping grounds. We're more toxic than the outside, some people, right? Like the inside, some people, because of the bitterness, the hatred, the negativity, the whatever, all of that stuff as well, right? It's a very toxic, we say people are toxic, and they truly are. Some people truly they need to detox, right? It's almost like a cleansing. How do you detox? You do the same with soil. And I think that it's a cultural shift, 100%, Ali, is how I see that, is this using the food system to leverage social, cultural change.
Yeah, I want to look at what possible tipping points could happen in the next 12 years, external, such as maybe climate change, that could really impact the future of food. I know I also want to bring attention in this conversation, or at least learn from both of you about tech and food, 3D print. We've heard a lot about 3D printing food and meat.
And replacing bees with robotic bits to fertilize, and these other sorts of tech, more efficient farming, all these technology advances.
So I guess, yeah. So I guess the question is, what are some of the tipping points and milestones that might happen over the next 12 years, and as well as looking at tech advancements that might shape that future?
Yeah, this is one. COVID is a tipping point. And well, we've already talked about it, but I'll just say that we're seeing the ramifications of how hard we've pushed on ecological systems. And I think us all having to consider habitat destruction, encroaching on wildlife and their habitats, we could end up in more situations like this. I think a tipping point could be if we see the real cost of the food we eat, if that was incorporated somehow, ecological or carbon taxes on industrially produced food, farm laborers, our healthcare system, even the animals themselves have historically absorbed the hidden costs of our food production. And I think a wake-up call would be if we had to pay the real price for the damage done to soil, to rivers, sort of what Rose is talking about eating toxic food and what that does to your health. What is the real cost of that? I think another tipping point would be cultural acceptance of different ingredients. I think change, humans are so good at adapting to change over time. There's a shock, and maybe that's a flood or a pandemic, and we can kind of absorb that as a new normal and keep going. And so sometimes it's hard to, because our food system now is so different than it was 100 years ago, but I think we'll absorb new normals over time. And I hope that some of those are that maybe your Thanksgiving tradition would be related to getting things from a garden. That would be a traditional, or you would be saying thanks for water, because we would recognize, because of water scarcity, how precious it is, or that there would be other holiday traditions that would involve seaweed or wild mushrooms or crickets and other really super sustainable ingredients that we have cultural biases against. And yeah, I mean, there's one seaweed farmer that I love, Brent Smith, who's I want to see sea greens in the grocery store next to kale, as something you can buy. And so a lot of these, we have these big shocks, like a flood, or a climate related drought, or a pandemic. But I think a lot of them and how it filters into food culture will be some of these slower evolutions, sort of like Rosa implied. And I want to see us embrace some of those and make our own new traditions and new values. I try to think of like, if you were to make your own secular altar, like what are the things you value? Is it soil and water? You know, like do we pay homage to these things and articulate our appreciation for them in a way that's meaningful for us and our children or our community? And yeah, someone put in the comments that insects are eaten in a lot of other cultures, and we're like such an outlier that we don't do this.
Yes. And I remember, Ali, in one of your presentations that Chrissy and I attended, you talked about mushrooms being a food of the future and seaweed and insects as well.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean, mushrooms, we just have realized that mycelium and fungus are like the foundational health of our planet. And engaging with those foods, I think, really connects us to this symbiotic relationship that our earth has, that we keep trying to silo it and be like, oh, this one ingredient is nutritional for you, and you can take it in a pill, but we need to recognize systems and engage in this symbiotic relationships and respect them. And mushrooms really, if you haven't watched the Fantastic Fungi documentary, it's amazing. But yeah, and seaweed, just briefly, because it can absorb up to 5 times as much carbon dioxide as land plants, doesn't require fertilizer or water to grow it. A lot of people are switching from land farming to seaweed farming and are sort of talking about themselves as the new American farmer. And there's so many uses for it, and like sugar kelp is delicious in salads. And yeah, there's a lot of ingredients like that, but it does require a longer cultural shift.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I love what you said, Ali, about creating our own new traditions, right? Changing our tradition, creating new traditions that are more in line, truly, not with just having traditions because they've always been, or someone in the past, 200 years ago or 500 years ago, whatever, said that this is something to celebrate, but celebrating new traditions that are really at their core embodying our own values and embodying the vision that we want to have for the future. So if we can start imagining the kind of future we want to have and creating traditions that will speak to that or evoke that, be calling, drawing toward that, moving toward that, then I think that those traditions themselves can, in some people, inspire new actions, new possibilities, new ways of approaching life, of approaching their own lives, approaching communities, and all that. And going back, Noor, to the question that you had asked that we're responding to, I think that the tipping points, I think you said, what other tipping points might happen? I think that absolutely, as much as I hate to say this, I absolutely think there will be more pandemics in the future, like no doubt there will be, but that's not what we need to fear. We don't need to stay in the fear mode. It's about how can we start reevaluating our lives and how we're living our lives, like the depths of our lives, the substance of our lives, the values that we're trying to embody and to share with our communities, with our families. What do we really value in life? It's getting a lot of people, it's like a slap in the face, like a wake-up call to like, what do you really value? A lot of people at this point are seeing how vulnerable people are and how much they actually need their friends, their family, their neighbors. They actually need to interact. We're social animals, right? We're not meant to be like isolated. And so when we go into this isolation, I mean, it's different if it's like a self-imposed hermitage where you're just like in your own thing, but it's different when that option is sort of taken away from you in a safe way. And so this whole time between now and let's say 2032 that you're talking about with resilience, I think that this is, I take everything negative that happens and turn it into a positive and see how can I leverage that and how can this be an opportunity to improve, to change, to challenge ourselves, right? To grow fundamentally as people. I mean, the average person, we like use about what, 5% of our brains capacity, right? There is so much untapped potential that we all have. We're all just, it's like society and particularly politics and just the whole, the polluted environment that we find ourselves in is so stuck in the third dimension, is so stuck in the limitations. And yet there are, we can't even like fathom how many possibilities there are actually. And so it's about stepping out of that idiotic comfort zone. It's about stepping out of what we've been and allowing ourselves, having the courage and the faith in ourselves, each one of us individually, to know that we can actually add value to society in some meaningful way, right? Through the words that we speak, through the actions that we take, through the brands and the people that we support, through the visions that we share with other people. I think it's really celebrating our shared humanity that's going to help move us in the right direction. Because we're always, things can just always veer because we're always this, collective of consciousness, right? And we need to bring into that consciousness, into that pool of everyone's awareness, we need to bring more positivity into there. I think that, I was having this thought came into my head this morning. I was washing the dishes after I made breakfast for my daughter, and this thought came in, and I was like, I think I need to share that today on this call. And it had to do with this, even though I wasn't directly thinking about this. I was seeing a garden bed that has some things growing in it, right? But it's not like completely full. And it's got like just a couple of different things, and there's not like a whole diversity of lots of things growing in there. So it's got a lot of like empty space in that garden bed. And what happens to the average gardener is that they're always inundated with weeds, right? Of course, you could poison your soil and like try to get rid of those weeds, right, with chemicals, but weeds will come back, right? And so weeds will come back when there's a void, when there's a vacuum, and when there's monocrops, when there's only linear thinking, one way of thinking. Weeds, negativity, negative thoughts, negative conversations, negativity in society will sprout up, right? Negativity. Now, and I was thinking about, and just bear with me, I was thinking about this other garden bed that is full, and this is actually factually true. It's when it's full of biodiversity, when there are like 30 things, shoved together, like literally packed together, all this diversity of different things growing, you actually suffocate out the weeds. You do not allow weeds to grow in. You do not allow that negativity to be able to grow. It's the same with society. When we can realize how much value there is in the diversity of thought and the diversity of cultures, right? When we can leverage that, when we can shine a light and see it as a positive thing, that there is diversity that helps us stay more resilient, that actually strengthens us, our communities, our potential to continue as humans, then we literally don't allow room anymore for the negativity, for the weeds to grow from a social perspective. I don't know if I lost you, but it makes sense in my head. When you have more biodiversity, you actually, weeds and pests can't get in there. Mm-hmm. So that's a point of resilience. That's a point of strength. Versus when we focus on everything that we don't like, I guess I left this part out, it was in my head, but when we focus just on what we don't like, on the problems, right? We pull that problem out, another problem takes its place. We pull that problem out, another one takes its place. Those are the weeds, right? Yeah. But when we stop focusing on problems and simply focus on solutions, simply focus on the positive, simply focus on staying in the solution side so you can be a problem solver or a solution creator. They're actually two different things. They're like a split, your brain, you can be a problem solver where you're always looking back at the problem and you're like dragging this negative thing with you because you're trying to solve it. And so you keep going back and giving fuel to that, versus when you become a solution creator, you literally it's like you're trying to create a utopia, like you're trying to create a new system altogether.
Yeah.
So you're simply trying to plant seeds of hope, positive things, without regard really to these other things, because they will have a positive impact ultimately.
So I think this can be a great segue. We want to have some time to take questions from our guests today. And one of the things that came up in a couple of questions, something from Minna and something from Jamie earlier, was this conversation about technology and technology solutions, or technology, if we want to build off of that, of whether are they solutions or are they problem fixers, and finding the balance between how technology can be a solution and when like in the Industrial Revolution, when they were more problem fixers, do they actually cause more problems than they solved? So looking at, I'd love to start with the positive aspects of how technology can be leveraged, and then what are some of the things that we need to be aware of to make sure that they're not hurting our systems. Ali, do you want to start with that? Oh, you're muted. I will. Ali, you are muted.
Ali, we can't hear you. Sorry, you need to unmute.
Thanks. I was just saying I don't work in technologic solutions as much. Like the last technology I used was just like, how do you desalinate your own water for drinking and cooking? And I agree that solutions-based, like if we just fret about the prevalence of industrialized agriculture, we can't ever move beyond that. And I liked what Rosa was saying about like these engagements matter. And so like whether you consider it technology or not, like what form of engagement you have the capacity for is meaningful. Foraging for wild dandelions does matter because you're engaging in an alternative system. And there's actually a wild foraging app that I really like that I use to kind of help make sure I'm not gonna die, which is unlikely with plants, but I like some of those like guides that can help you, you know, and like buying organic, you know, not for your health, but for the seed sovereignty and health of farmers, workers thousands of miles away. Forms of technology and labeling and information systems, I think that empower people to engage meaningfully is what I suppose I'm the most interested in that realm. Yeah, I feel like that's the most I have to say on the technology component, aside from just like technology that allows us to share knowledge about growing and cooking. I think that's a big barrier for a lot of people. And I heard from a colleague who's a professor in Vermont where there are like farms everywhere. And during the pandemic, they had the National Guard come in and distribute MREs. And a lot of it is people aren't connected to a farm or they don't know how to cook with those products. And so where technology can help us do that, I think is really critical.
Yeah, I think there are technologies just like anything else. You know, there's the ones that are helpful and the ones that are just like mindless gadgets, right? So the technology can do. Really, it's about like who's behind it, who's the driver, and what's the mission, and what is the objective with that technology. Technology in itself doesn't have a brain, like it doesn't do something on its own, so it's not like good or bad. The potential upside for technology is clearly accelerated efforts toward some objective, right? You can go fast, you can scale it, it can impact a lot of people much quicker, right, than the horse and carriage. And on the flip side, you know, there are tons of, I want to say cheap technologies out there that don't really, they're kind of like a consumable, like in and of themselves. They're not really change makers. They're not really driving any change. They're sort of just like, hey, use my app and, you know, do this one thing. It's more about what is the ethos behind them. What are they really designed to do and how much impact could they potentially have?
Yeah. Do you want to like, maybe let's look at a couple of specific examples, like perhaps new agricultural systems that might help with solving world hunger. I don't know if you know of any specifics, but another one would be things like meat alternatives. So Impossible Burger, Beyond Burger. This was a question from Marley. Also cultured meat being something that's in the pipeline to go forwards. Pick any one of those examples to unpack of like, where do you see the benefits or any fears around that technology?
Yeah, I mean, plant-based meat is really interesting, and I'm really hopeful in it as not a like elitist luxury product. I think there's like a real potential because it's in Burger King and it's in places where like me and my dad would go. You know, it doesn't feel like a place that is out of reach, and it like actually is kind of replacing a lot. If it can replace our meat consumption, I worry about the inputs into creating lab grown meat, how much fossil fuels are required to run the lab and to produce that, and what I think it's still unclear. Like, I don't have a conclusion because I ask people all the time about this, and I think it's still yet to be determined because they still are a processed food. But anything we can do to like reduce, as we need to reduce our meat consumption, the rest of the world's meat consumption, well, the whole world's meat consumption is rising, and like we have to do something about that. So I guess like I always live in the gray area, so I don't have one like silver bullet. But you do get the potential for like what Margaret Atwood wrote about in her sci-fi novels, which is where you know, it further distances us from food because it's such a lab grown product. Right now, those existential worries don't bother me as much as just reducing our carbon footprint. Like, let's do what we need to do that. So yeah.
Cool. Unfortunately, we are at the time where we need to wrap up. There's some more great questions in the chat. Maybe we can find a way to address them at another point, but we want to make sure that we stay on time for our creative exercise.
I'll also post, I'm pretty sure I wrote an article for the Food Future Company about technology. I'll post it in the chat if I can find it, as well as that app I saw someone asked.
Yes, if any, there's been lots of really great resources that have been added to the chat. So I highly encourage everyone to click those little 3 dots in the bottom right corner to save the chat so you can reference those articles for later. There's lots of really great conversation happening throughout our time today.
We have a minute for the call to action, though, from our panelists. And we'd love to hear kind of your final call to action to people that are with us today and people that might listen to our conversation in the future before Christy and I do our call to action. Who would like to start? Rosa?
So a call to action, I guess the easiest call to action that I think pretty much anyone could do is to collect seeds from different cultures, from different foods that are grown around the world, because that becomes like a seed bank. Like you have your own seed bank, and you have a lot of diversity of things that can be grown, and that's critical for the future of the food system. Everything is grown from a seed, you know, if it's plant-based, right? So yeah, I would say to be a collector of, if you've never been a collector of anything before, be a collector of different kinds of seeds from different cultures, and to grow them if possible. That helps to kind of ensure our future, right? There's a quote that to plant a seed is to have hope for the future, something like that.
Thank you. Ali, your call to action.
That's such a great one, collecting seeds. I think seed saving fell out of our culture completely. And someone asked a question about GMOs, and like, I'm not really concerned about like the scientific like health. I feel like the whole media conversation around GMOs is like geared toward like, are they healthy? Which is just like not the point to me. The point is that we lose seed sovereignty, we lose seed diversity. They also come with increased pesticide use, which threatens the health of farm workers. And so, yeah, I know a lot of people who have been saving seeds just from things you eat, like strawberry seeds, or like try engaging with food in a way that you wouldn't normally. Like view it as an object with its own life and its own autonomy, and like collaborator. Look up ways that, like if you have rotten potato, how to plant it into a plant, or how to reuse something in a different way, repurpose food waste. I was playing around just as a speculative thing to make a face mask out of like old pita, which like obviously isn't useful, but just this idea that we can engage with these as materials and not just like throw away what we don't want to eat. And yeah, someone commented regrowing food from stems. There's a lot of like interesting projects you can engage with. And I guess my call to action would be pay attention. None of us will be able to understand what's going to happen in the future if we can't. There's no way we can understand climate change or understand the future if we can't pay attention to what's happening in our own environments. Pay attention to the tree outside your apartment or house and how it changes over time. Plant something and like truly give it attention, because I think that's one thing we lack in our current food system, is giving that sort of ecological attention to things. And my other one is to eat more seaweed.
Awesome. Wow, these are such important calls to action. I really appreciate you mentioning repurposing food waste. Personally, one of the things that was culturally shocking to me after my move to the US was how wasteful people were around food, and food is sacred, and it's so important to incorporate repurposing food waste into our lives. Wow. I've learned so much in this conversation. Thank you both so much for being with us today. If you enjoyed this conversation and you're enjoying the work that we're doing at Resilience 2032, please take a moment to support us. You can donate to help us bring the social media theater experience to life this August on our website, resilience2032.com. I also want to very quickly give a shout out to some of the team members, our team members that are on this call, Marley and Michelle, that have been part of the really cool discussion that's happening in the chat, as well as Jamie, who's our advisor. Without them, we would not be able to do what we're doing, and we're really excited about everything we've been working on behind the scenes for what's coming in August. And I want to also mention that we're really proud that we got into the Can XR pitch. So a shout out to all the team for all the hard work that's been put into what we're doing. Next week, we're talking about the future of diversity. Be sure to mark your calendars. Yes, Christy.
So beyond donating, another way that you can support us is by checking out our social media, following us there, and reposting, resharing. We really want to start to grow our audience so that we can mobilize futures thinking for everyone and help engage in these conversations with more people. So if you wouldn't mind going onto any platform, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn even, and share something with us and with your network that you had as a takeaway from this conversation. We also have our Tuesday Writers Room. And this is where we invite you to come and write the future with us. And it's really important to us that we have as diverse voices as possible going into the creation of this story, both in the pre-writing process between now and August and in the actual experience itself. So we really hope you will join us on Tuesday. Yes. And we're going to transition to our creative exercise.
Yeah, thank you for the reminder, Marley. Also, if anyone who can speak to the future of any industry or part of culture, let us know for future panels. We have a link on our website where we're always looking for panels to speak to issues of the future, and we want to, of course, hear from you about what you want to hear about. But and Ali, thank you for including all the links. We will be sure to include everything that was referenced. This is such a great reading list that was compiled today just in the chat. Such important resources. Again, thank you, Ali and Rosa, so much for your time and for your brains, for being our brain trust. And I hope that you will stick around for our creative exercise.